Hello, and welcome to a conversation on Arlington's digital destiny, where we will focus on what Arlington will look like in the year 2050. I'm Christanne Littlefield, the Chief Digital Innovation Officer for Arlington County, and I have the privilege and pleasure to spend the next 90 minutes discussing this topic with a very distinguished panel. Serving as digital futurists, we will engage in a discussion not to predict the future, but to use foresight into identifying what could happen, or in some cases should happen in the future. Today, we will focus on introducing the art of the possible for what Arlington County and the National Capital Region, and how we can influence the realization of our desired digital destiny. To begin with, I'd like to go around and have everybody introduce themselves and share a little bit about yourself, including maybe something we might not find on your LinkedIn profile. This is the first time we've had an opportunity to meet as a group. So to kick it off, Sean Dubrovac from the Consumer Technology Association.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean Dubrovac. I'm the Chief Economist for the Consumer Technology Association. We're probably best known as the owners and producers of CES, a tech trade event held in Las Vegas every year. I'm also author of a book called Digital Destiny.
Florence,
Sure.
would you mind picking up?
I'm Florence Hudson, and I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at Internet2, which is a not-for-profit consortium of over 300 universities, industry partners, national labs and agencies, very high-speed network, and I'm responsible for leading us into the future of beyond what you can do with the internet today, what you can do with it tomorrow, and in 2050.
Great, thank you. Cheryl?
I'm Cheryl Foyle. I'm principal at Kidder Capital. I run a smart city strategic venture fund. Our founders taught HIT of HIT contracting. We have a huge real estate portfolio, and we basically focus on investments where we can help startups de-risk and self-fulfill, across as they spread across real estate, construction, transportation. In my past life, I operated as CTO in a couple startups. And a little fact you won't find on LinkedIn is that I wrote the first AI to ever get an Emmy nomination.
Well, very cool.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Interesting. All right. Jack?
I'm Jack Belcham, Chief Information Officer of Arlington County, and not on my LinkedIn would be the fact I was trained as an historian. And actually, my focus was imperialism in 1900. How I've made it to technology is a question.
There you go.
Or might fit.
Yeah. And Frank?
And so I'm Frank DeGiamarino. I lead the U.S. state and local government business for Amazon Web Services. Prior to Amazon, I was at the White House and worked for Vice President Biden and ran the recovery program. And prior to that was at the National Academy of Public Administration, which is a congressionally chartered nonprofit group that focuses on the good management of government. And before that, I was in systems integration and consulting and strategy consulting. So I have a mix of both private sector, nonprofit, and government, all focused on government and technology. My little known fact would be that my wife and 3 girls are on a quest to get to all Major League Baseball stadiums in the country as a group. This started 5 years ago, and we've been to 10 stadiums, and I'll save which is our favorite for later.
Oh, very interesting. Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. So for the first half of this session, I'd like us to focus on big picture, blue sky conceptions about what the future of Arlington could be. And to kick it off, Sean, could I ask you, could you set the stage for us by defining a framework for what it means when we talk about a digital destiny, and what are the forces underway that are causing this change?
Sure. When we look at the world that we live in today, it is still mostly an analog world. We talk a lot about digital, but for the most part, we still live primarily analog lives, and everything is pretty much focused on our physical space. Some of these things, though, have been in the works for decades. So you can go back to the first digital computer, which showed up in 1942, the ABC. It wouldn't be until the 80s where home computing really became ubiquitous. The first hard drive, 1956, but it isn't until the 90s that we start to think about storage as being ubiquitous. And so some of these things that are being put into place today might take decades to come to fruition, but when they do come to fruition, they forever change the type of environments that we live in. And so slowly, surely, we're digitizing all of the physical space that we live in. We started first with devices, and so over the last decade, we've been replacing all of our analog devices with digital ones. We replaced analog tape players with digital ones, analog phones with digital ones, And so slowly, surely, we're starting to now replace the analog objects in our world with digital ones. And I think one of the things that happens with technology, when something moves from a scarcity to a surplus, we start to waste it. So you can think back to computing power in the late 70s was a scarcity, so we used it very sparingly. Around 81 to 84, it becomes a surplus, and we can start to waste it. So we do things like create graphical user interfaces, which before would have been very restricted because of the computing power they required. We can then start to use it for things like that. And I think that's where we are today with things like sensors. What once was a scarce resource is now in abundance. And so what happens when we start to deploy these things widely is they change the use case scenarios. They change the way we live, the way we interact, the type of devices that we use. You can think about something as simple as image sensors. They used to be expensive. It was a scarce resource. We would put just one on your mobile phone. When it became inexpensive, we started to put a second one on your mobile phone. So now we put one on the back, we put one on the front, and you can see how that's changed the way we use those devices. Today we take tons of selfies because of that image sensor on the front.
Right.
And so it was simply the deployment of what was once an expensive resource, a scarce resource. We made it an inexpensive resource, we deploy it widely, and then it slowly changes the way that we interact, the way we communicate. And I think that's what's happening today. We're taking what was once a scarce resource, we're deploying them widely, whether that's image sensors in your devices or image sensors throughout a city, and it's changing the way that we start to interact, the way we communicate, the way we live, ultimately.
Great. So one of the things that makes me think of then is the explosion of data that comes from these devices. So we talk about exploding volumes of data or different mediums of data coming in, not just through the traditional data that's created during the normal course of business, video streams, digital sensors. Jack, can you talk a little bit about how we can incorporate data analytics to help realize the future? What can we do with it? How can we harness it?
Yeah, what Sean's talked about, I think, is so prevalent here in Arlington County. If you think about what the asset we have here, we have a small community that lays on the footsteps of Washington, D.C., and we have a demographic of a very young, technology-aware community, and the expectations of that community are growing. And what's happening is they're sort of outpacing what we're doing and providing for services in the county. And data is the driver. And I think you said this, Sean, in your book, and it's so true. There's probably not an occupation that hasn't been disrupted, is being disrupted, or will be being disrupted going forward. And what does that mean to us? You know, how do we analyze, make sense of what we have? And again, to quote from you, and you said this, I think, true. We're drowning in data and starving for information.
And I would add on to that and say that it's not just the data that people are talking about, it's the data backbone, right? What's the way that all these sensors are going to be uploading data to the internet? Where is it going to go? Is it going to be normalized? Are there standards? Is it just going to be floating out in a private server somewhere? And ultimately, is it the public that's going to be providing that via free Wi-Fi, the fiber project, something else? Or is it going to first come through private sector stuff where, you know, real estate or buildings are putting in these backbones that are essentially bringing all the data from sensors into the cloud?
So I think it's going to be a real mix. So the National Science Foundation had a couple of workshops regarding beyond the internet, which is interesting. 3 workshops at the end of January, beginning of February. I participated in 2 of them for Internet 2. And one was about future wireless cities, and another one was about applications and services in 2021. Everyone picks a different year into the future. They picked 2021, which is fine. And what we talked about was it's really going to be a mix of everything. And if you try to let your past give you a frame for your future, you're going to get stuck because it's going to be very different. But there are things you can leverage, you know, that you have today. So Internet 2, we have this research and education network. It's a 100 gigabit backbone that we have, and it's wired, right? But all the you're right, all the wireless data is going to be coming into it, and then there are going to be backbones that connect it. The real opportunity is going to be how we look at this as more of a system of systems. So I was looking at some of the things going on around here. So I think like DC WASA as an example, the DC Water and Sewer Authority, I think has sensors by their, you know, for their water pipes. That's interesting, so you can go and fix it, but what if you actually looked at the sensors from the water pipes connected to public safety, connected to the transportation system and the tolling system. So if you can tell that a water main is going to break, then you divert the traffic. It's not like, oh no, now what do I do? You actually text the people who work in that area and say, work from home today. So that's when I think you're really going to be able to start meeting the needs of this generation that wants this personalized view too, and not just, I look at it as, I can watch TV in the morning and they say, okay, so, there's a lot of traffic over here, it's going to rain over there. But I want to say, okay, well, what about me? I'm going to be here, right? And that's what people want now. So you have to look at it all together and I think personalize it for people.
And that's where government needs to head. And we just talked about this. We released a post the other day about if every government asset as a sensor, what does that mean for the government enterprise? And if government can start to understand what you just said, it has a potential of managing the system from lagging data to leading data, and start to ingest that information and really think about being people obsessed, and stop thinking about people as somebody that housing needs to take care of, or something that the policeman is taking, or the policewoman, police person is taking care of. It's really a question of, if I look at all of the data I have coming my way, how can I broker a new outcome for the people that affects them where they work, live, and raise their kids? So that's where I think we see the biggest opportunity for technology. And also then when you think about government as a platform, it's kind of what we're talking about these days. We haven't really gotten there yet. It seems it's coming, and there's a lot of aspects that are in place. But when we think of smart cities, we think of machine learning, artificial intelligence. A lot of this is starting to come into place. And for the leaders, it's time to start thinking about, what does that mean for the future of my city, and how can I be people obsessed?
I think that's really cool. And what I was thinking this morning flying here was that I think what would be really cool is to say, so what does 2050 look like? And not start with, what could it look like? A few scenarios, a little scenario planning, that could be a lot of fun. Maybe with some of your citizens, that could be really cool. And then look at what you have today, and then what would be the steps to get there? What do we think would be interesting? And you could look at it from different ways. The personalization is really fun, and I think that's where a lot of the humans are going, what they're looking for, what we're all looking for. But then you can also look at the system and your critical infrastructure, because you have to protect that too. So as an example, if you look at like the smart grid, DARPA just is investing now in looking at, God forbid somebody tries to attack it. And so you can start thinking about actually having test beds and trying this stuff out. So you have to think of a couple of different levels, because they want to personalize it perhaps. So maybe you say, we have a couple of goals, what should they be? Should it be citizen experience? Should it be public safety? Should it be critical infrastructure safety? And then maybe work with the community, because one of the things that I've seen that works the best is when you keep the humans with you. So in Stockholm, Sweden, a number of years ago, the people wanted to reduce traffic congestion and improve the environment. And so they looked at this whole plan and the mass transportation plan. They said, okay, we'll put in this congestion pricing, thing, so people won't want to drive, through the tolls at that time of day. They're like, but we still want them to go into the city and spend money. They still have to get to work. So they put more trains and more mass transportation, and then announced, we're going to do this thing. We're going to try this congestion pricing and tolling system. They tried it for like 7 or 9 months, and then they stopped it. And then they did a report, available in Swedish and English, and then all the humans could read it, and then they actually had a referendum and had the citizens vote, do you want to do this long term? And they voted yes, because they could see the actual numbers. Carbon monoxide went down this much in this area, carbon dioxide this much here, traffic went down there, and people experienced it. So it's really important to keep the people with you.
Do you find government at times is an inhibitor to innovation because of its policies and procedures and regulations?
Yeah, but you can be a leader, though, right? We can all be an inhibitor. We can all stand there and say, I'm not moving. But we can all be a leader. I bet you can.
And sometimes in the long term it helps. So like health data standards or something that has now really accelerated the healthcare industry, and they were horrible when it first came out, but now everyone's better. Now there's so much open data that's available, like on the real estate side, that there's another industry that's about to change. One day it might be like high frequency trading, and that stuff's starting right now with startups that are using data from Virginia and DC.
Tell us more about that. What do
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So digital census data, transportation data, I'm not a real estate person by nature, but all the other stuff, demographics, third-party providers, and a lot of that started once Arlington and DC started to have these data streams, which are just now available. In the past, if you wanted information about a lot, you'd have to call people. What are the permits like? How tall can the building be? And now you can see that all digitally. And a lot of that was because the government started it first, both federally and at the county level.
So the open data movement that the government has is actually enabling this, you're saying?
Yeah.
That's great.
In 2008, when I was at the National Academy, we released a paper that said, treat data as a national asset, use IT as a commodity, and create more cultures of collaboration to drive innovation in government. And I think to your question, is government a blocker? I think the question is, how can government be more of an enabler? How can it understand and work with the private sector more to help drive more opportunity in the marketplace, to be driving more solutions that engage in the valuable assets that it has? Government, as we said this at the National Academy as well, is shifting from being a problem solver to being a convener. To convene first and problem solve second. And if you also look at where is IT in the private sector versus IT in the public sector, I would argue that there isn't a startup today that Cheryl's investing in that doesn't have IT at the table. Can we say the same thing about government? Can we say that we're bringing IT to the table, the people that understand data, the people that understand technology and the services that are available and what you can do with it, to come up with those new, I call them outcome brokers, that are going to change how you work and how you can live, like the open tables of the world. How are we thinking about having those for people in our communities?
So one of the things that I find challenging when we're talking about the future is it's somewhat easy for people to see maybe 10 years in advance, because it's still, you can still kind of picture yourself then. But we're talking 25 to 30 years out. How do you help people, as we were talking about before, get that buy-in, understand what's really happening, what's underway, and then be able to help participate, so to engage them so that they are part, they become a catalyst for innovation, for transformation?
I just want to, my daughter's going to get mad at me, but I used this example with her. She's 16, her and her good friend. I said, what's going to happen when you don't have traffic lights? We have to start talking like that now, because that's going to affect the change in the future. Yet if we really think about, you brought up autonomous vehicles earlier, what is that going to mean? And you need real examples like that are out. We don't know if that's 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years down the road. Yeah, we need to be painting those scenarios.
And we need the right stories now. So, like, for example, one of my favorite things that's happening right now is that if a building just gets live utility data, it can see how energy is used. It'll save about 30% on energy just from knowing when to turn on and off the lights.
Right.
And now when someone says, well, these sensors are everywhere, you go, yes, but DC's electricity usage could go down by 30%, and it's already happening today.
Yeah.
And that helps people feel more confident about these sensors, about their privacy concerns, because there's something that everyone cares about today, right, that you can ultimately feel good about, and it's a short, quick, easy story.
I think that's one of the keys, is that all of this information is already out there. It just isn't being captured and cataloged in a very systematic way. How many steps I took every day of my life was already there. I just wasn't capturing it in a very systematic way. I wasn't capturing it digitally, and then I wasn't using that information to empower decisions. So at the micro level, those are the things that individuals can do today. Governments, communities will be able to do that moving forward. So to me, when I look at it, governments are sitting on a treasure trove of information. They just may not be capturing it. They may not be cataloging it. They may not be allowing others to use it. They may not be capturing it in continuous time. So if they start to do that, and that's what sensors enable, is the digitization of information that was already there and capturing it in continuous time as opposed to discrete periods of time. Today I can measure my heart rate continuously throughout the day. In the past, I used to go to the doctor and just get it looked at every month or every 6 months or every year. And so as that changes, it empowers a tremendous number of services. That's where I think government should look to play. What information are we sitting on that we haven't digitized yet? Let's digitize it. Let's make it available to others, and let's see what they bring to the table.
So I think what will happen if you start with that is that it might be hard to bring all the people who understand technology with you, because they'll say, for what? So the other way I've seen, I think you have to start at both ends and kind of bring it together. So you can start with that, what is all the data we have? Then you want to say, well, what are we trying to accomplish? So like in Stockholm, they said, we want to reduce traffic congestion, we want to make the environment better. Okay, we get it. Okay, so they got a better OCR reader, they did the tolling, they put the sensors in the places where, they could check the environment, and then they got the data they needed to make the decisions to meet their goals. So I think it would be good to create some goals. And it could be reducing energy use. That's a great example. You can use building management systems and smart building technology now to give people information so that they make better choices. Like when you go into a restaurant, it tells you how many calories it is. Like, oh, I really want that, but I'll have this instead, right? Yep. And so when they have information about how much energy they're using, what it's costing them, and how it's impacting the environment, they could make better choices. So you could, make decisions like that. Say these are, and I would go on this journey with the citizens. I think that's really important. So as an example, you could create, I could see a project that you might lead. How fun would that be? Where that you maybe actually have like a few community focus groups, get some information. We're envisioning 2050. What do you think about that? I would ask your kids. I would ask, the kids in middle school, high school, and then some of us, whatever, and get a look, what could it be? What do you wish it could be? And you might get some really cool ideas. And then perhaps from that, you would say, okay, this is what you told us. That really works well when you say that, and it has to be true, though, that, this is what you told us, what you'd like. Now, these are the ways we think we could get there. And then when you start trying to make investments down there, they're like, oh yeah, that's right. That's going to be so we can get that. We reduce the energy use. I know, whatever. So, improve the experience. I'll know when I should or should not go into work. You could even come up with some really interesting things. And one of the things I was thinking about, and I think I've heard about it in this area, is that people are looking at, not that you travel all over the place, but that you actually kind of live more in your little community, almost like going way back to the Iroquois or something like that. And it worked out really well, I think, for them, right? So it could be that you really want to kind of look at those examples. Maybe there are like pods of communities that, are really more self-sufficient. And then they really care about everything that happens, the garbage and the energy, because it's all about them. So you could get some interesting points of view, but then they would be going on the journey with you, which I think is really important.
Something said about communications, though, and I think it's so important, and you said it as well, is getting the awareness of what this means. Like you said about eating the foot traffic. And if you eat, say, a bag of potato chips, knowing not so much that there's 300 calories there, but you're going to have to run a mile and a half to run that off, there's a compelling reason to do it. And you mentioned the idea of connectivity. And you've got a huge network that can do all kinds of things. But if you go to the average building owner in Arlington or anywhere in the region and say, I can give you something at 100 times the speed you have now, they'll say, well, that doesn't really move the needle on the dial for me.
Yeah.
Because, so what's that mean to me? How do you get that awareness? How do you get that communication? As the example of the bag of potato chips, there's a compelling reason. I don't want to run a mile. So maybe I won't eat that today. And maybe I need that speed because here's what I could do with that in the future.
I think early on, the first step is looking at payback periods, right? And it's traditional CapEx type investment decisions of, does this provide a positive net present value, to use a financial term? So you're going to say, do I deploy this capital? What's my payback period? What's my return on this capital? And then over time, as you start to have these systems deployed and they start to come together, then you start to look at other utilities. It's the utility of the residents and of the communities. I think in an area like Arlington, you have a lot of overlapping communities. So it's not necessarily a geographically defined community, but it's communities defined along a number of different terms and specifics. And so as you start to look at how these communities overlap and how they intersect and interact, I think that's where you'll start to see the benefit. So that's what comes. I think the next 10 or 15 years is all about making investments that provide some type of return on that investment. But when we get out to 2040, 2050, 2060, we'll start to be looking at quality of life and other things, I think, in a more grand way, because by then you'll have all of these systems deployed that can tie back together. And so it will be less around just pure dollars and cents and more around the type of environment that we're living in. And things like air quality, which today are difficult to measure, in the future are going to be relatively easy to measure. And we'll have those sensors built into
My phone.
your phone, your car, but it won't be
My
just
device.
it won't be just your phone. And that's the key,
My glasses.
is it'll be everywhere. We'll have 15, 20, 50, 100 different measurements available to us anytime we go. They'll be put in our shoes, so it's constantly measuring as we walk. I mean, all of this will be pulled together, and if we're willing to share that information, then that's where you'll start to see solutions pop up. I think that's the big step, is taking something that's hard today and making it easy in the future.
And it's the mindset to create a new mindset around exactly that, and that government's role is to enable that to happen. Government doesn't have to solve everything. That's an industrial era model. It's an analog government, to pick up on what Sean was saying, right? If we can get to a digital destiny, that would mean that you've turned on that ecosystem. We don't think in terms of silos. We think about how we're inquisitive by nature. We're thinking about what's the next problem that we can go solve. What do we need? What data is there? What technology is there? What people are there? And how can we pull something new together to go change that community, but actually enable the community to change itself?
And on the other side of it, protecting the community. So the other role for government is to protecting the people, right? Protecting the people, protecting the infrastructure. So the other challenge with this, if people will give up their data. Actually, a year ago I was at an event with Sonia Sotomayor, and I brought up Internet of Things, privacy and security. And I said, I'm working on security. She said, good, I'm working on privacy. You do that, I'll do this, right? And what she said was, she doesn't think that we humans in the US, at least in some countries they get it, realize the civil rights that we're giving up by giving up our data. But we all have to think about that, we really do. And there have been some Supreme Courts. There's one in Arizona about 5 years ago that ruled that any metadata about open data is also open. Okay, so that's cool. No, but what do you make open and what don't you? And in a workshop we did with the National Science Foundation, IEEE, which is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, 400,000 geeks like me around the planet that work together. We had a workshop with IEEE and NSF at GW right here in DC at the beginning of February on end-to-end trust and security open architectures for the Internet of Things, so that it's an open architecture so everyone can deploy it, and it's the way you deploy it that makes it secure. And you have to make sure you're using encryption or key pairs or random number generation, whatever it is that you're doing. But then we turned it into a technology and policy discussion, and we created this term called TIPS: trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. And whenever you create one of these systems or you create a device, even if it's like some kid who gets a cute little Raspberry Pi for their birthday, and they go online and learn how to make a device that lets the garage door go up and down, and they're like, oh, I'm so proud. What's your daughter's name?
Catherine.
Catherine, I'm so proud of you. This is so cool. You tell your neighbors, they say, oh, that's so cool. I want one too. And then Aunt Susie wants one too. And before you know it, everyone's garage doors are going up and down, everyone's getting robbed. And she didn't mean that, right? But she has to be taught that, right? And so that's one of the things that we're looking at too, and the government really has to think about that.
From a developer's standpoint, I mean, you're investing in the community. What are the driving forces you see in order to get people into office space, to retain them?
That's a great question, and it goes back to something you said. I'd say millennials and the younger generation, which last I heard that's called Generation Snapchat. God save us all. They want to live where they work. They want to work where they live. And one place I think that Arlington is already doing a great job is Crystal City recently. That We Live has just come up, the liquid space. The built world has to become more liquid and efficient, just the same way that Amazon revolutionized development. I remember when the day when I was like, I don't have to buy a server, right? Now I don't have to buy something to send email. I don't need a queue. And the real world has to be the same way. And one thing that's nice is when you make it liquid and you make it easy to get an office, easier to get a bigger office, easy to step out of that office, easier to get a bigger house, a smaller house, is it becomes more efficient, and you also create an environment that can tolerate risk better. Because if you're trying to build a company, you shouldn't have to sign a year lease. You don't have money for 3 more months. I know that. I see that every day. So to foster innovation, you really have to, foster failure, in my opinion.
You know what you're making me
That's a
think
good
of
point.
is an agile community. What an interesting thought. Because that's what you're saying, that it's agile, that the people are agile, the building space is agile, the needs are very interesting.
All liquid.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting concept.
Can you say more about when you say
Yeah,
liquid, what do you,
You mean,
like, how does that means something for you, and I'm interpreting, and I want to know what you think it means.
so I'll go back to Amazon. I need a server today. My business dies next Tuesday. I don't want that server anymore, right? I need
Right.
5 servers today. I need 1 server tomorrow. And to me, living and working space is very similar. You know, I just hired 2 new analysts, and they both want to live in that we live in Crystal City. Just because it's $1,000 flat a month for a bed, they don't want furniture. They don't know if they're going to stay in this place for long. You know, and they get a tribe of people that are just like them around their age that are doing the same thing, going to 776 in Crystal City right afterwards, you know, for like a innovation party or something. And they're able to kind of get the story of how they want to live their life, the same way that in Silicon Valley you think, I'm going to live there, I'm going to go to Sandy Hill to raise money, I'm going to go walk around in the Barcadero after work. And so we're finally getting the story for how like innovation can happen in Arlington County that I'm finding really interesting.
So it's not boundaries, though. It's what you're saying, liquid could cross boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to think about, well, it's for Arlington, but really it's, like you said, Frank, all boats rise in high tide.
That's right. The other thing that's interesting about that, and if you want to tie a government example to that, would be we still have small business loans that give $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 to a small business, and they go buy hardware and software. Why do we do that? VCs don't. She wouldn't do that. She would say, no, "Are you on the cloud?"
Well, government, that's what I was going to about being inhibitors to innovation. I mean, government has policies and procedures to develop 20 years, 100 years ago for the comfort of government,
but
not necessarily the benefit of the residents of the...
Wait a minute, I want to challenge you on that.
Oh, please.
Where's Lou? Yeah. No, so, but the reason why I want to challenge you on that is government did something right at the time it was doing it. And now the times have changed and government needs to do something different again. They have to figure out, how can I put a program in place that takes that pool of money, enables this liquidity, and creates a more agile community, and enables a more agile community, and plays that role in a way that is good use of government dollars. Not, how do I have to defend my small business program? Because that's the way it works.
You know what's interesting about that too, that you're making me think, it's like when we used to say fixed to variable assets, right? Like fixed to variable people, you know, when you would use consultants or something. So it actually could be good for government, you know, when they, you know, give this pot of money out and they buy a server and then they're stuck, right? What do they can sell it on Craigslist or whatever. But, you know, as compared to using pieces of it month by month, maybe they'd actually have some left over to put toward a new project or something. That would be cool.
Or when one business fails, you just, okay, I got that back, now I'll put it into that one.
Money, you mean?
The actual, well,
Capital.
you're enabling the asset to go to somebody else. You didn't lose the asset.
Oh, like the buildings, yeah.
No, like the
Or
server.
servers. Oh, okay.
In my
You're
world, I
still
think
in
about it
server
in
land.
terms of a
I thought you were
server.
past server land up into clouds. Okay, got it. I was trying to play it.
Well, I'm trying to say, don't use your capital on buying a server.
Yeah.
Use your capital in an operational expenditure type of way. I'm doing an OpEx procurement, and then if I don't need that OpEx anymore, then that gets shut off. The money gets pulled back. I can redeploy it some other way.
That's hard to do. That would be even a bigger business model change, I think, for the government. Because they're like a one-way ticket, I think. On that.
Yes, although
That
you
would have
could
to
think of
change
different
too.
models. Like Singapore has implemented this model with us and said, if you meet this criteria, then you can enroll in this program, and when you bring us your expenditure bill, we'll reimburse you for it.
Right.
That's all it is.
Okay.
It's no, and now it's actually that's bidirectional, right? Yeah. And government actually knows what's happening with the business, and they're much closer tied to the business. And that's a simple thing. That can lead to much bigger things down the road if the mentality has changed.
And that's the key is, I think, to your point, in government, it's a little slower to change. And it's changing the mindset to be disruptive, but disruptive in a good way. And how can we encourage that it's okay to take risks? that it's okay to move out of your comfort zone. It's much more natural, I think, in a commercial world. And what can we do to help?
I'm going to fight for the government guy. I'm sorry. Government people work really hard, do a lot of smart things, are agile every day to get stuff over the line to serve for people. Here's the thing. They hit the target and they miss the point. They set no context for people where they work, live, and raise their kids. And so we don't have an awareness that government is smart. Yet when we put in a big belly solar trash can, we cut traffic pickup routes, truck routes from 18 times a week to 2. And that's smart. But does anybody here know what a big belly trash can is or what it does? It's like, this is our opportunity as government, is to say, we actually, if we're smart, we use the data, we can tell people what we're doing again.
And that gets back to your experience, Cheryl, in storytelling, and how can we practice interactive storytelling to engage the audience, to make them aware of what's going on.
And I think sometimes the role that government should be playing today is putting the building blocks out there without trying to build what they think is the solution. I think that's the hurdle that we often run into, is they see the problems clearly, but they try to build the solution. And I think
it should be convene first, problem solvers.
Yeah, and I think I look at the economics of other things that are changing. So the smartphone is a great example. Today, in the past, when you built a device, you looked at, okay, if I add this feature to it, it's going to increase my cost by X, but I think I can sell it to this many more people, and so I'm going to end up having a bigger market. I'm going to make money off this. That has shifted now, and they say, I'm going to put this sensor into this device, and I'm going to let developers run with it. And I hope that developers will build really interesting solutions which will drive people to this platform and help me sell more devices. But I don't know. So in some ways, part of building digital destiny is letting go of controlling your destiny and letting other people influence it.
I'll give you a real life example of that. The Obama administration, that's how Frank and I got together, and said, we don't encourage infrastructure investment. This is the accelerated act of getting innovation going in the world. And so they were building bridges and roads. So what they did is they said, okay, we'll refresh your traffic signals, allow you to take the copper wire and make it fiber optic. So we did that. And so we said, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to run fiber optic network over that, right? The same conduit, dig once, build twice, and provide services for the community, for the government, and such. Oh no, wait a minute. We never intended that for that purpose. You're actually going to use it for something other than controlling traffic signals. And back to your point, they missed the point. They made the investment, good investment, but missed the value that could come out of it. End of the story, we had to pay the state government back for using the fiber optics that the federal government put in. How does that work?
Right, so that might not be one that makes people feel good. I got 3 that follow exactly that model. Again, back to Singapore, One Map, Transport for London in the UK, and Open Grid in, it's actually called Windy Grid in Chicago, that they've just made Open Grid, which is exactly this idea. If I put my data out, I have a platform behind it that's usually a map of some kind, and say, what does the community want to do with this? And some of them will invent the Kitty app to get kitties to link up, but some people will invent and say, what's the best education institution for my child in this? And that's a real, it's a real business value. And it starts to be, with APIs and data, what can you create with what's there? And all government is there is just enabling that smart stuff to happen.
I'd actually say that Amazon has a similar model for its technology. You guys have always been so cheap for starting companies to use, free, basically, and you kind of wait because you think out of the 100 people that are using it today, 10 of them will get big, and that's really all that matters, is those 10. It's okay that everyone else just played around and then couldn't figure it out or had some business issue.
But there's a lot that just playing in itself creates value, and to your point earlier, it's creating environments where failure is okay. When it only costs you a couple of bucks to run that server for X amount of time and you tested something, that's really great.
And when you're driving innovation, if you get a 30% hit rate on what you do is successful, that's huge. If you get 10%, it's good. It's respectable. And as you get more people like nodding, like she knows that, he knows that, as you get more people doing innovation and this whole model, maybe that will be more accepted. And you can try some stuff. You often tell my team, let's do this once in a row. Once in a row. Let's try this. That's it. and then see what we learn from it. And so maybe you can start trying to inject some of that agile thinking to go with her agile spaces.
Say,
agile community.
I say perfect is the enemy of the good, and momentum begets momentum. So please do something. It's a huge opportunity.
Sean, you talk a lot about commoditization and economy being the adopter, and really that turns the cycle. And I think you talked about the electrical industry when Edison invented the light bulb. It wasn't the light bulb that made the difference. It was the plant that powered it, which took place afterwards. And I wonder if you talk a little bit about that, because that's what we're talking about. Is what are the it's really getting the people to react to it, the community to say this makes sense. We should be investing in something like this.
The focus was on the light bulb, but it was ultimately the ability to generate power in an efficient way and power all of those light bulbs that really drove Edison's plan forward and drove him to be the successful solution. They'd all convened in Paris at the World's Fair, and they were all showing different solutions, but it was his approach to power distribution that really drove that forward. And so I think that speaks to what we've all been saying. Sometimes if you are targeting a specific mark, you'll miss the mark. And so create enabling technologies and let others run with those and see where they run. Not all will succeed, but some will succeed beyond our wildest dreams. And they will create an environment that we hadn't even imagined. Most companies at the end of the day follow emergent strategies. They're not the strategies that they set out to be. Netflix started by mailing you DVDs in the mail, physical media through the mail. Amazon started by selling things like they were the everything store. They're far beyond just the everything store today. All of these companies have emerged because of some emergent strategy that they followed. And I think government communities can follow that same process.
Okay, thank you. We will take a short break now, and when we come back, we will discuss what this digital future will look like in our region, and in particular, what it means for Arlington's digital destiny.